And I might just start the presentation by acknowledging that I'm a very grateful recipient of MDQ services. I'm Brisbane based and I live with FSHD myself. And I can say with great pride and certainty that I can do my job better because I'm so well supported by the team at MDQ through their allied health team, um, and their wonderful support services. So, for those of you who are new onto the call today, or maybe haven't reached out directly to MDQ, I really encourage you to do so, because I can tell you the professionalism and the service they provide certainly keeps me working and able to do all of this fun stuff that I'm about to update you on today. So thank you for having me, Penny and team. So I'm the Managing Director of FSHD Global Research Foundation. We're a small medical research foundation based in Sydney, Australia, but we operate throughout Australia. I just thought I'd include a little snapshot here of who we are. And our focus predominantly is on research and systemic advocacy. So we lean very heavily on the social and networking support services of the state-based muscular dystrophy associations, which is why we partner so well. We appreciate our partnership so very greatly with MDQ. But we see ourselves as global leaders, funders, and change makers, innovators, and advocates. So you'll often hear when we speak about research projects that we fund, we take risks. They're always measured risks, but we fund for things that are not easily fundable through, government grants. We fund things that are set to sort of change the way things are done, and we fund grants that look to achieve a proof of concept of a new or innovative approach to either research or developing a drug therapy. We do firmly believe a world without FSHD is possible. And we are starting to see, as we've heard this morning, that we are starting to move into disease modifying therapy clinical trials. We also want to go beyond stopping and slowing FSHD. We want to see us, our patient community, building back their muscles and regaining function. So we're also investing heavily in muscle regeneration. I'll talk a little bit about that later in my presentation. Next slide, please. This in front of you is our whole team. So these are not all full-time staff members, but just so that you can put faces to names. On my left on the screen there is Natalie Cooney. She's our chairperson, and is heavily involved in our events and philanthropic work. Peter Smith, when I speak a little bit later about our disease registry and working through the process to be trial and treatment ready, Peter is who you'd be connecting with. So it's nice to see his smiling face on the screen. Noting Peter also lives with FSHD. Laurel is our marketing and comms manager. Then we have Lisa Christie, our operations manager. Lisa also has FSHD, and many of you who've dealt with FSHD Global will come across Lisa in your travels. Mitch is our youth outreach coordinator. Mitch lives with early onset FSHD, and is an absolute powerhouse of a young man, and he's heavily involved in wheelchair sports. So you'll see some of our articles through our newsletters talk about some of Mitch's passion in wheelchair sports. And then we have Danielle Thompson, our Director of Partnerships and Events. Danielle's been with the foundation really since inception, so has a wonderful knowledge of global, of our research, and the organisation. So that is us. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and all of you probably know a little bit about FSHD, but for those of you who don't, the name is ironically very difficult to say for a disease that does affect your ability to enunciate and speak at times. But facioscapulohumeral dystrophy is actually a little bit misleading because the name implies that it affects just the face, scapula, and arms. That is really not the case. It often starts to manifest in those areas, but it really can affect any skeletal muscle. It affects mobility, it affects balance. even, hand grip and arm strength. And it really does extend far beyond the basic mobility that is often spoken about. It's also very commonly misdiagnosed. So similar to other neuromuscular diseases, there can be a long um, diagnosis journey. And this is also because of how variable the condition can be. So there's rarely two people with FSHD that have the exact same symptom onset. So if you're being assessed for a neuromuscular condition and FSHD, seems like it might fit the bill, don't discount it just because you don't have one of the symptoms that are associated. It can really present in so many different ways. Next slide, please. We're not going to get too far into the genetics of FSHD today, but I know that a lot of our patient community is very informed. So I just wanted to touch on the differences between FSHD type 1 and type 2 and clarify for people why it's really important to have your type or even just your neuromuscular disease confirmed via genetic testing. So FSHD it has two components. One is the genetics. So there's a gene deletion in FSHD type 1 on your chromosome 4, which allows this DUX4 gene to switch on. DUX4 should only be active during embryonic development. It shouldn't be switched on as you're an adult. And the result of that aberrant gene expression, meaning a gene that's switched on that shouldn't be, is the production of a protein, also confusingly called DUX4, but the protein is toxic to muscles. So when this gene is allowed to activate, we have what's called a gain of function. So we have this addition of this toxic protein, which kills off your muscle cells and results in those muscle cells being replaced by a fatty infiltration in the muscle. FSHD type 1, that's caused by that deletion on chromosome 4, is 95% of the documented FSHD cases. If we can just go to the next slide. And FSHD type 2 represents about 5% of cases. Now, FSHD2 is very interesting because it's predominantly caused by an epigenetic problem. So there is a gene involvement, but it's not on that chromosome 4. But the epigenetics or your gene methylation allows the DUX4 to be active where it shouldn't be. Which is the little yellow circles that you see at the top there of that very complicated scientific diagram. You can see though in FSHD type 1, those yellow circles also are present. And one of the big differences in type 1 is if you also have this epigenetic issue, it affects your disease severity. So FSHD is both a genetic and an epigenetic disease. And so that's why it's really important when we speak later about the different types of diagnostic testing to understand all parts of FSHD. It's particularly relevant in the way that we see therapies being developed. So next one, please. So both types, type 1 and type 2, lead to that activation of DUX4 and the expression of protein, which is why we see the same symptoms and the same clinical presentation across both types of FSHD. So if you haven't had a genetic test, it's not possible to know what type you have. So it doesn't matter for symptom management what type you have. What it does matter for is maybe family planning decisions and looking at what your options are for family planning. It can also really matter when it comes to participation in clinical trials and also future eligibility for therapies. When we talk in a few slides' time about the types of trials that are out there, it'll become more obvious why it will matter because it depends what that drug is trying to do. If it's targeting, gene regulation, it's only applicable to that genetic type of FSHD. If it's targeting that toxic protein, it will possibly work for both types of FSHD, regardless of what type you have. So that's why it's really important to have a genetic test. Next one, please. I also wanted to mention early onset FSHD. So typically, we see FSHD symptoms start developing after adulthood. Normally, women are diagnosed in their late second decade of life, and men usually in their early second decade of life. Some are much later and some are much earlier. I know myself, I look back on photos, I could see facial involvement in my teenage years, but I wasn't diagnosed until the age of 30. Often those misdiagnoses are just because the symptoms are hard to pick up on. And so our adult onset patients, we have this really huge variability. But for early onset FSHD, the symptoms are often much more severe. And so we do see children experiencing symptoms, often facial weakness before the age of 5 and weakness in their upper body before the age of 10. That definition does change between countries at times. So some pediatric neurologists recognise early onset as having that scapulohumeral involvement under the age of 8. But generally now the consensus is the age of 10. It's also important to note that for early onset, there are some different associated conditions that need to be what you need to be mindful of. In early onset cases, there is a correlation with Coates disease, which is a retinal disease, hearing loss, vision problems associated with Coates disease, and some cardiac involvement at times. So personally, I believe that early diagnosis and supportive care is really important. And it is possible if you have adult onset FSHD and pass FSHD down to the next generation, it can be early onset FSHD. We often see that if you reflect back on the genetic and epigenetic diagram that we showed, the same gene deletion is passed down, but it's the methylation that is different in the next generation, which impacts on disease severity. Next one, please. So we've heard a little bit about clinical trials today, which is great. I'll try not to duplicate the information that's already been shared. But I think one thing from a patient perspective that's really important to remember is that these are research investigations. They're not treatments. So you're not getting early access to a treatment that we know works. A clinical trial or a therapy that's in testing could improve your symptoms or disease. It could do nothing, or it could have a negative effect. So in signing up to take part in a clinical trial, it's just really important that you're aware that you're not automatically getting early access to an effective therapy. You are very generously supporting this research and putting your own body on the line to test a potential therapy. There are some potential benefits in participating, and we'll go through that as well. But it really is important that as a patient, we go into these opportunities with very clear understanding of what it is that we're signing up for. We are testing to see if a drug is safe, firstly, and then also to see if it works and it works as it's intended to modify the course of your disease, manage symptoms, or provide a quality of life improvement. Next one, please. I love that Anita used the same diagram. It means that we're on the right track here. But I just wanted to put this into an Australian context, which I think Anita did really well, that in between that phase 3 and phase 4 process, we need, in Australia, we have our TGA approval, Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee review to look at the cost and benefit of these potential therapies. And then it needs to be listed on the PBS to be reimbursed. We use the word reimbursed. You're not paid back. It's meaning the drug has funding under the PBS. Australia has a slightly different process for drug approvals and reimbursements than other countries. So as a patient advocacy organisation, one of the things that we are doing is to try to make this process as smooth as possible and make sure that there is the appropriate economic evidence that we can support the companies with to show what the need is for FSHD and other neuromuscular diseases and what the economic benefit would be to having a disease modifying therapy. a really important thing to look at is the size of these trials. It can be really disheartening if you've registered or you want to take part in a clinical trial and you're not accepted into a certain phase. You can see as those trials progress, the numbers grow quite significantly into, once we get into those phase 3 trials, we need a significantly larger cohort of patients. These numbers are probably not quite relevant for FSHD or the other neuromuscular disease as a rare disease, but they do give you an idea of for the scale how those numbers grow as you progress through the phases of trial. Next one. So I guess, sorry, the message there was if you miss out on recruitment in a particular phase, don't lose heart. There may be another phase that recruits in the future. And as you can see from this diagram, there are a lot of trials running and being planned. Courtesy of FSHD Society, I've stolen their little drug development pipeline because it fit on a single page and ours goes across 3 pages. So for efficiency, thanks to the FSHD Society. What was really important here is I popped a little Australia flag next to the companies that we are actively working with to open up trial sites here. There are a few that are not on this list that are still in stealth mode or that are not quite at IND phase. But one that I will mention, I saw in Dr. Henderson, he mentioned the Geneva trial, and so they are obviously out of stealth mode now. They are under our therapies to support muscle. And that's particularly relevant to this audience because that will be a basket trial, meaning it covers 5 different neuromuscular diseases, and they're looking at trialing a regenerative therapy for muscle. And that's particularly interesting because that will also is planned to include pediatrics. So we're working closely with them, and we're really excited to support that trial. I'll show a map on the next slide, but before we do, just go back. I teased you a bit there. Sorry, Penny. Before we do, these trials that we're looking at standing up in Australian sites, the first phase that's active here may only be in 1 or 2 centres. It doesn't mean that for those later phases when we need more participants, it's very likely that phase 2 or 3 is when those sites will expand. So don't be disheartened if when these trials are first announced, they only come to 1 or 2 hospitals. Most of these companies are looking at least 4 sites across the course of their trials. And I also just wanted to mention that this drug pipeline does not include supportive approaches that we are also working with other companies on. So things like supplements, exercise, physical therapy, even other types of muscle technology and digital muscle, electronic muscle stimulation and things of that nature. There are a lot of supportive approaches that we believe will be very complementary to when we first have drug therapies. And we're firmly looking ahead to that phase of development for FSHD. If we just go to the next one, please. So you heard from Dr. Henderson about some of the active trials currently running here. I wanted to point out the EpiCRISPR biotechnology trial. Now, something's happened to my color scheme here. I'm not sure why, but I tried to be very clever and color code it. But the EpiCRISPR biotechnology trial is just running in Sydney at the moment. That is an AAV gene therapy trial, which is a potential one-shot treatment. But you heard from Anita Cairns about the challenges with AAV, because if you've received 1 dose of an AAV therapy, you very likely will not be able to receive another one. So it's also important when you're looking at different trials on offer to really understand what that means for you and for future trial participation. I wanted to expand on one comment that Rob Henderson made about there being washout periods. When we're looking at these one-shot gene therapies, we don't know what the washout period, it could have a durable effect for lifetime, which is the hope. So I do know that for some of these trials, if you've participated in a trial that has a durable effect or a anticipated effect for life, like the EpiCRISPR bio trial, it's quite likely that you wouldn't be eligible to take part in other FSHD trials. So just another consideration point. What a great problem to have, right? If we're weighing up whether a therapy that we think might stop or slow progression for life discounts our ability to be part of another trial. It's a good problem to have for FSHD, but it does take a lot of careful consideration, which should be done, in consultation with your family and your medical team. The Sarepta trial is the Arrowhead, formerly the Arrowhead trial. As Dr. Henderson mentioned, Sarepta have acquired the Arrowhead technology, and for both myotonic and FSHD. That is currently running at Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Sydney, and I believe they're in the process of setting up their Melbourne site, but it's not operational yet. And then I also did want to mention that in Melbourne, this is not an interventional trial, but the MOVE-PEDS study is running. That is an international pediatric natural history study, and a really, really important study to take part in if you have children with early onset FSHD, because that study is being used to develop and form a consensus on outcome measures that could be used in trials for children. So there are travel bursaries available, and those costs are covered for families that are willing to take part in that study. And it's through some of the world's best experts in FSHD, Dr. Ian Woodcock and Dr. Katie Duval, absolutely brilliant clinicians and a wealth of knowledge for this disease. So I highly recommend considering being part of that study. Next one, please. So we mentioned some of these before. Anita did a really great summary, but why should you consider being involved in a clinical trial? And the reasons that we recommend really thinking about whether you want to do it goes far beyond accessing a potential therapy. The most compelling reason really should be altruistic. So do you want to help scientists, doctors learn more about FSHD and learn about these potential therapies and see if they are safe and see if they work? Do you want to be part of finding a successful treatment? No one else will know in the world that you took part and you played a role, but you will know. And I think there's probably nothing more self-fulfilling in knowing that you've made a difference to your worldwide disease community. So that should be a really compelling consideration. I find personally being actively involved in research that doing my bit helps me feel more optimistic. I stay up to date with what's happening in FSHD. I meet others who have FSHD, and I like being able to speak to world leading experts in this disease. If you're taking part in a clinical trial, that investigator that's running your trial, so Dr. Henderson, Anita Cairns, we've got some incredible clinical trial investigators in Queensland. You will have that first-hand contact with people who are really leading the field. So I think there's a huge psychological benefit there. It's also good to remember that in a clinical trial, you're not receiving clinical care. You're part of this experiment, but it's still a great place to learn more and be involved. Next slide, please. But the other things to consider in being in a clinical trial, you heard from Dr. Cairns before about the potential side effects and risks. Some of these trials are highly experimental. Some of them are first in human studies. So these drugs and this, not just the drug itself, but sometimes the delivery mechanism of how we get the drug into muscle, sometimes they have never been in a human before. Some of them go directly from mouse testing into people, some go through a larger animal model, but regardless, any animal model is very different to people. And so there are potential side effects and risks that need to be well considered if you're deciding whether to be part of a study. There's also things that you probably don't know about your own body. I know there's been people in other disease clinical trials that have not realized they had, impaired kidney or liver function. And then that was quite surprising when they, experienced an adverse effect through a clinical trial. So it might not be unknowns about the potential drug. It might be unknowns about your own health and your own body that present a challenge. Um, Clinical trials are a lot of work to participate in, depending on the frequency of the visits and the duration of those visits. Some of them need an overnight stay on the first visit. Some of them require a muscle biopsy. It's important, especially neuromuscular diseases, when it's often a family disease and you might have multiple people in your family with this disease, considering the burden on other family members. If it's a child, or if you're a parent of a child, what are the impacts on missing school for your child, or missing work, not only yourself but carers, or the impacts on your broader family network. You might go to all of that effort and be on the placebo, and not actually receive the drug. And for most of these trials, there is at least a 1/3 ratio of people who are on a placebo. Some of them are a 50-50 split. In making your decision on whether you're willing to accept the risk of being on the placebo, one really good question to ask is whether they will include an open label extension, which means once you've completed your time on that trial, everyone on the trial has the option to go onto the active drug at whatever the decided dose is at that time, and remain on it until that drug enters the market. So until we reach that phase 4 section on that diagram that we saw. Now, that can take many years. So at that point, when you decide to stay on the open label extension, that is when you're at that point where you're probably receiving early access to a potentially effective therapy. Again, we won't know until all phases of the trial conclude on whether it really is a safe and effective therapy. But if you feel it's working for you, you have that option to stay on the drug, and you can come off it at any time if you change your mind and would like to come off it. But that's just something to note. If you are on the placebo arm, and you will not know if you're on the placebo arm, but if you feel you have been, being on that open label extension can be the carrot at the end of that journey. It's really important that in making these decisions, you talk with a broader base than just the neurologist that is the PI on the trial, because it's really helpful to know what questions you would like to ask. It's really helpful to speak to your family about the support that they think you will need. Sometimes our family almost know us better than we know ourselves, and they can prompt us to think about other things that might be really relevant in decision making. It's not something that you will want to take lightly, and I really encourage people to think about these things now before you have to make the decision on whether you want to participate in a particular trial, because the last thing that we want to do is make these emotive decisions because the opportunity is right in front of us, without taking the time to be really well considered and well informed. You have a wealth of information in your networks around you, which includes MDQ, includes FSHD Global, Save Our Sons. There's patient organisations out there that are happy to help. And all of us are here to help our community understand what's involved and what's in front of us. None of us are doctors. So what we see our role in as the foundation, and I am sure I can speak for MDQ on behalf of this as well, is that our role is to help you ask the right questions and to understand the answers that are given to you. So those things can take time because you're going back and forth from, a medical setting back to your network of support. So I just really encourage people to start reading up on these things and making your own sort of risk tolerance decisions on what types of risks you're willing to accept and what types of risks you are not. Next one, please. So I think we've had a little bit of a mention about registries, and I just wanted to, this is my segue into, you don't have to be in a trial or want to be in a trial to make a difference to research in this country. It's okay if you decide that this is not for you. What you can do to move the needle, though, is to be an active community member and join a registry for your disease. I know that we've had mention of the Australian Neuromuscular Disease Registry, and that covers several different neuromuscular conditions. I think that MDQ will be making the link available to that. But it also does include FSHD. And I know this is a little bit confusing because we have two FSHD registries, but they have their own distinct purpose. And anyone that believes they've had a genetic test but don't have the documentation, if you join the ANDM, the Australian Neuromuscular Disease Registry, they can help you source the results of your genetic test. And we collaborate closely with the team there. Once you get your results, then you can work through the Cure FSHD registry, which is FSHD Global's registry that I'll speak to about into the future. But what it does in being involved in research in this way and joining a registry is that you help us build this evidence base for FSHD research and also for future like economic health reporting that help us get, potential approved therapies reimbursable under the PBS. So being active and being on a registry helps attract clinical trials here because we can confidently tell companies, yes, we have this many patients at this many sites. And they know that it's worth the investment to them to stand up as a study because they know that they'll be able to get the patients to participate. Next slide, please. So Cure FSHD is our ambitious name for our FSHD disease registry because that's what we seek to do through developing this registry. It's a patient-led registry that's available through an app through Google Play or the Apple Store. It's also available on a web link through our website, and I've got a little screen for that and a QR code later. It's open to anyone in Australia who has FSHD, and we really encourage every single person to join. We know we have families where one person joins and stays up to date, and there's lots of other FSHs out there that are just sort of hanging in the wings, waiting for something to happen. The more patients we have registered and moving through this process, the better understanding we have and the better data we have to support our economic health modelling. And to encourage clinical trials here. So if you are the family member that has been tagged as it for the one to register on a registry, please hassle everyone else in your family to join as well. Just by being in the registry, it does not mean that you have to take part in a trial. It is completely separate. You'll be advised of trials that are running in your area or that you may be interested in enrolling for. There is no obligation, and we as a registry will not hear back from those sites on whether you have registered and taken part. There's no implied ought here. There's no pressure from FSHD Global or from any of our partners that links being part of a registry into actually being in a trial. This is about giving you the knowledge and opportunity, and then you can do with that whatever you would like to do. Access to Cure FSHD is absolutely free, and FSHD Global will provide all financial support to cover your diagnostic testing and imaging, and I'll talk through what's involved in a future slide. And we have loosely termed it a clinical trial passport. We've coined this term as a sort of a passport to trials and treatments. And so we've stepped out all of the components in a little sort of tick box order so that patients can go through and get all of the documentation that you need so that you know that you're trial and treatment ready. Next slide. So what is your clinical trial passport? So there's a group of questionnaires to complete, which you do in checkboxes on your phone, all about life with FSHD and quality of life. These are standardized questions that are sort of harmonized throughout the world to make sure that we're getting consistent information from our patient community. In doing that, it means that some of the questions can be a little bit broad or um, subject to a little bit of interpretation. Peter Smith, that I mentioned before, is only a phone call away if you need any help, or you can send an email if you need any help understanding what these questions are asking. They're very standardized. We do have a couple of text fields to provide some additional information along the way. We also collect your blood-based DNA results. So in Australia, normally your test sample are sent to Concord Hospital or over to Path West in Western Australia. And you'll receive a little printout from your doctor that says, you know, either a Southern blot test or a bionano optical genome mapping test was completed, and this was your genetic results. You don't need to interpret that test. If you just upload it into the app, we go through and collect the relevant information and upload it in the back end against your profile. We also provide free saliva testing. So this is an in-home kit that comes to your house, and that shows you will send that kit directly to a lab that partners with us in the USA called the Peter and Takiko Jones Lab. They provide that testing and send you directly the results for that test. It doesn't form part of Australia's health system, so it's completely separate. And is sometimes a good first step. If you suspect you have FSHD, you can do that as a first step to then show your, your doctor, because we've had some people that a neurologist is reluctant to perform genetic testing on, but this can be a way that you can sort of show them that you do require that genetic testing. And then once you receive the results directly back from the lab, you upload those in the same way that you do your blood-based genetic results. Once you've done all of those tests, you're eligible for a full body MRI scan and Springbok analysis. I'll show you what that Springbok analysis looks like later on, but it's a full body, like heat map of every muscle in your body, showing the muscle development, so your size of muscle, any asymmetry between your muscle pairs, and also the fat infiltration, which is an indicator of your disease progression. That technology is in use in a lot of our FSHD clinical trials, and we are providing our whole patient community with one Springbok analysis, which they can use to, self-advocate for better clinical care or to have a look at what's actually happening inside your body, because FSHD can largely be an invisible disease. As we all know, it's very hard to know what's happening to your muscles. We also have a mental health screening module, which is optional. You'll go through and fill in a questionnaire. It will highlight to you if the results show that you're at risk for needing additional mental health support, and we have some mental health services that are provided to you through the app as well. So this is designed to be like an e-health hub. You retain access to all of your own information so that it's available at your fingertips if you need to use it at medical appointments. It can be really hard to keep this all, easily accessible. So that's that's been our motivation for building this. Next slide, please. So there's lots of reasons that you should join. We've spoken about some of them today, but the biggest reason is to get yourself trial and treatment ready. Even if you don't want to participate in a trial, when there are approved therapies, it'll be really important to have confirmed genetic diagnosis so that you are eligible for those therapies. So the time to get ready for that is now. So join and get everything. As I mentioned, FSHD Global provides full funding for all of those steps for any of your out-of-pocket diagnostic costs. We don't pay for your medical appointments, but we do cover all of the test costs. If you need to travel to attend a centre or have your MRI scan, we also do offer travel bursaries to allow that to happen. So that's great. Next one, please. This is what that Springbok report looks like. You'll get a multiple page report. I think it's about 18 pages that delves into all of the muscle groups in your body. We've had people use these to talk to their physiotherapist and have a look at what's happening in their body and build a better physio program or hydrotherapy program. Interestingly, this is the technology that is also being used in a lot of trials to see what is happening when a drug, during the drug trial, because it's incredibly sensitive to change in muscle, and we can see changes in muscle in a 3-month period. So, just in normal progression. So the hope is that, when you're on a therapy, we can really see what is happening to your body. Through this technology, we've also developed a disease progression model. So this is an AI-powered model that's being used to help plan clinical trials and also assess the effectiveness of potential therapies. So you effectively get a digital twin, and as you progress through the trial, you're measured against what would have been happening in your body should you not be under the care of this clinical trial. So I think that's fabulous to see a good utility of AI. We hear a lot of negativity around AI, but we can really see it in practice in medicine, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. So this is how you can join Cure FSHD. There's a little button on the top of the FSHD Global website. There's a QR code there if you download that. But you can also get it on your phone through Apple or Google Play. My little top tip, though, I prefer to access it on the computer when I'm uploading information. I find it really finicky to try to do that on my phone. It might just be my age, but I much prefer using it on the phone just to look at the information and even to do the questionnaires, but uploading those test results, I really recommend you consider doing that on your computer. Next slide, please. I wanted to just touch on Project Mercury. So I'm not going to read through this whole slide. This is a global collaboration between several different patient advocacy organisations. We've got 10 member countries. Australia is one of the countries that are participating in this project. I actually chair this project since December this year. It'll wrap up at the end of 2027. We highlighted a number of challenges in bringing therapies to families, and we decided that as a global community we would be much stronger together and to be able to solve these challenges collaboratively and give companies some certainty when they're planning clinical trials and want to bring a drug to market. I think you can see by the amount of involvement of biotech and pharma companies in FSHD now that strategy has been very effective, and I'm really proud to be part of this global project. One of the big aims was to increase the number of qualified clinical trial sites globally. When we started the project, I think we had 24 sites running. Now we have 54. And in Australia, we had none, and now we have 5. So I think we're winning when it comes to if it's a competition between the 10 countries, but I'm a little bit biased there. We also wanted to increase patient engagement in clinical research through patient registration. So that's been a big reason why we created the Cure FSHD registry. That's been, and we know that we need about 10,000 patients worldwide to be registered and genetically confirmed. We have reached that 10,000 globally now through the Project Mercury initiative. We've exceeded 10,000. In Australia, we've launched our registry just over 12 months ago. I think we've just hit over 300 people that are registered, which has been exceeded our expectations. So our push now is to get every single person with FSHD in Australia registered and trial ready. Penny, I can see you've got a question.
Ignore it, please. I was clapping my hands to
Oh.
say well done, and it came up as putting my hand up for a question. So thank
No,
Emma. Keep going.
that's all right. That's all right.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's all right. And then the other really important thing for us was to look at how we ensure sustainability of this kind of initiative. We don't want the project to wrap up in 2027 and everything to be forgotten. So a big part of our work over the next 18 months is to transition from a project-based infrastructure into an evergreen toolkit, which will be owned by the World FSHD Alliance, which is a collection of patient advocates for FSHD around the whole world. And we're producing things like framework and toolkits so that they can be localized to in-country initiatives. Next slide. These are our Project Mercury partners, and a huge apology to Brazil, who I missed off the slide, but we also have Brazil in the mix. Also a huge acknowledgement to Avidity Biosciences, who are now owned by Novartis, but also Fulcrum Therapeutics. So they were our two founding industry partners who made contributions to get this project up and running, and allow us to start this really important work. So we really acknowledge them for their for backing us as a global community and giving us some funding to help us, do this impactful work. And then next slide. And I wanted to just give you the Australian snapshot of what we're doing under Project Mercury. So as I mentioned, we've finished our Cure FSHD patient registry. We have funded the development of a disease progression model that is now in use in clinical trials through Springbok Analytics. We are just about to launch a huge campaign to fund a pediatric normative database. Now, this database is going to be really important for any muscle diseases. There is no normative data for children's muscles anywhere in the world. And so this will be developed through the University of Virginia and incorporate MRI, imaging of healthy children, functional testing and questionnaires, and help us start to account for the impacts of things like growth. As children grow, muscles change. And so being able to quantify that to see if a therapy that's meant to aid in muscle growth is working, we need to understand, well, how does that muscle grow normally in a child of this age? So this will be really important research for FSHD, but also for all neuromuscular diseases. We're developing this database to be open access, so it'll be freely available worldwide, and with quite a diverse group of participants. So I'm really excited about that. We also are planning a workshop at the end of the year in Sydney, which will look at advanced care planning and palliative care. This is talking about how you manage the complex and sometimes really competitive symptoms in FSHD during periods of other acute illness. So we often see people with respiratory disease that then have trouble with feeding and swallowing, positioning, body care. So this is not just looking at end of life care. This is looking at how do we empower patients and have those conversations early on in the disease journey to know what is important to you, what are your preferences when it comes to different types of interventions and care, and to make sure that those conversations are happening through medical, those medical appointments, but that really patients are central to that forward planning, and to make sure that that clinical care is a really high quality. This will do two things. It will help us improve clinical care now. It will also provide us with a really good foundation for the economic health studies and burden of disease studies that I mentioned to support drug approvals in Australia. So there's some of our up and coming research priorities. We're continuing to fund basic research and translational research through our grant program as well, but they're the things that we're driving internally as a foundation that I thought you might find interesting. And final slide, a little bit of a thank you to my team and to everyone here for listening, and a little prompt. It's World FSHD Day on June 20, so get your little orange slice selfies and help us raise awareness for FSHD. And a huge thank you to MDQ for inviting me to speak today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Emma. Are there any questions? There were a couple that came through. Just for time considerations, there was just a couple. If anyone's got anything, pop it in the chat. But we've had one that came through was, just reading it here, I'm a family member of someone who has been recently diagnosed with FSHD. How can I best support them?
I think one of the best things we can do for our family is to ask how, what help they need, how they're feeling, and also to, I think with the neuromuscular disease broadly, it can feel a little bit helpless because at the moment it's not really actionable. So it feels like you've just got this dark cloud above your head and nothing much you can do about it. But in reality, even though there are no drug therapies, there's lots that we can do to live our best life with FSHD. So I think being really well informed on like nutritional benefits and even physical therapy, the benefits of physiotherapy and occupational therapy and supportive care is really important. As a family member, I think making those things as easy as possible for your family member. So maybe offering some practical support. They might, FSHD causes pain and fatigue. So maybe they just feel exhausted or overwhelmed. So just being there in a supportive way is really important. And I also think recognizing that not everyone wants to get onto a really intensive therapy program or nutritional program, and it's a really personal decision. So respecting what their wishes are for how they're going to deal with this. Not everyone wants to use a mobility aid, but they might feel more encouraged if they have a family member that says, you know what, no one's going to judge you. Why don't we just, would you like to use one for the day? I'll push you and we can try it out and see if it's helping you. Just normalizing those conversations where you're just being open to being as supportive as possible, I think is really important. And ultimately just letting the person know that they're no different today than they were 6 months ago before they had a label for their condition, and you love them just the same. So that's my advice.
Thanks, Emma. That's great. We've got one last final question here. Just go up. Thank you. Inflammatory signaling. Is there any exploration happening around management or treatment for people living with FSHD?
There definitely is. I know there's a really important research program happening down at MCRI at the moment that is looking at the immune system and inflammation. So that's definitely an area of research at the moment. And I know that a couple of the drugs that are in trial, one of the mechanisms that they're looking at is those inflammatory pathways. So I think that is a really relevant area of emerging science for FSHD.
Thank you. Emma, we'll bring your session to an end. We've had several people comment and thank you for the session in the chat. Very informative, very helpful. There is some great work being done, and I was thinking throughout your presentation, you're a small team who is having a huge impact. So thank you to you and to your team for all that you're doing in the FSHD research space. Is there anything you wanted to just conclude with?
No, I think for me, it's just I think that the more active we can be as a community, and whether that's getting involved and supporting, MDQ's community events, or, joining online chat groups and connecting with other people with FSHD or whatever your neuromuscular disease is. I do just think there's so much value in that. So I do really encourage people to get involved in whatever way suits you. It doesn't have to be fundraising, doesn't have to be clinical trials, but get in there and do something is my encouragement.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks.